Friends, in this episode, I plan to talk about Kautilya, about the importance of security issues in diplomacy, and the role of the foreign ministry in security management. First, Kautilya. Kautilya was a great thinker who wrote a book, except that it was not written, it was handed down in oral tradition actually, called the Arathashastra in the 3rd century BC. The historic Kautilya was an advisor to the king of the Mauryas, Chandragupta, and his manual, Arathashastra, is actually a comprehensive work on governance. It's the story of how the king should govern his state. It was transmitted in the oral tradition, so the work that survives has probably undergone evolution and change, but we don't know that. We can only guess. That work is a complete schema of governance. It talks about taxation. It advises the king that your taxes should not be so high that they kill business or that demoralize those who are inclined to work. It talks about raising the army. It even deals with the maintenance of elephant, because the elephant was a major instrument of war in those days, like our tank maybe. And it has some elements on diplomacy. Now, Kautilya was not writing consciously a textbook on politics. He did not talk about concepts. The concepts that he used have to be surmised from the practical advice that he delivered in the form of 2-line stanzas. So the entire work is a collection of stanzas. It was translated into English by a scholar at the beginning of the 20th century called Kangle, probably a Maharashtrian. And the Kangle translation is viewed by many as one of the best. And there exist other translations. My Foreign Service colleague, the late L.N. Rangarajan, also produced a fine work that rearranged the text of Kautilya's Arthashastra in chapters dealing with themes, because Kautilya didn't do that. Kautilya simply gave expression to his advice for the king in a free manner, in an open manner, without imposing a rigid structure. So, why is Kautilya important? Today's scholars have found that in Kautilya there is a degree of wisdom on political science, on management of relationships, including international affairs as they existed in those days, because remember, that was a society of states, warring kingdoms. That was exactly the situation of India in those days. So, Kautilya's concepts have to be teased out. They have to be extracted from his advice. Another problem came up. The people who carried out the original work of translation in English, in German, they were not political scientists, they were linguists. So they understood language, but not the thoughts or the concepts behind the language. So in a sense, the translations didn't always capture all the nuances. I'll give you an example. We now discover that Arthashastra is the first full expression of the doctrine of raison d'etat. That's a French term which literally means reason of state. What it means again is the state is an entity with a life of its own. And the first obligation of the state is to protect itself. That is something we understand in the age of the COVID virus. Every state, every country says, I must look after first my own citizens. So, Kautilya's work has been translated recently. Not the entire work, but shall we say the doctrines inside the work have been given expression in a work by Professor Mitra and Michael Liebig. Their book is called simply Kautilya's Arthashastra, published in 2016. That's an expensive book. But the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis in New Delhi, which has a wonderful project on India's indigenous knowledge, has also put together works on Kautilya, which are on its website for free download. And there is a particular work which is called I don't see the exact title, but that work, which has been put together by Pradeep Gautam, who is a wonderful scholar at this institute, by Michael Liebig and two others, that brings out some vital points. It points at the fact that Kautilya understood the doctrine of warfare, in the sense that he advised the king not to go to war, because he said the outcome of a war cannot be predicted. You can lose in a war. So the war is the last resort, but do everything you can to avoid war. And it's very interesting that this concept is almost directly parallel to Sun Tzu, the great Chinese thinker, author of The Art of War. In fact, there are many similarities between Sun Tzu and Kautilya, except that they did not communicate with each other and they lived in more or less contemporaneous times. Now, great scholars like Max Weber, Morgenthau, have seen in Kautilya the earliest expression of many doctrines that are central to today's political science and international relations theory, including political realism. I don't want to say too much about Kautilya, but let me conclude by saying that Kautilya also speaks about leniency to be shown towards a conquered people. There is, in fact, an element of humanism in warfare that you find in Kautilya. Kautilya also lays out a whole set of ideas on how to manage intelligence agents. And many political scientists have said this is the first doctrine of intelligence operations. So Kautilya is a rich resource and directly connects with what we are trying to do, we're trying to study, which is security as a dimension of international affairs, security as an objective for the state. That brings me to my second major point. Why is a state concerned with security? Security is important because the state, small or big, worries about its safety. It worries if the international system will protect it. Small states depend on the United Nations as a major structure that provides basic security. It was the scholar Karl Deutsch who said that large powers believe that they are destined to put the affairs of the world in order. That is to say, large states have big ambitions. Small states don't have those kind of ambitions. So, how do we deal with security in terms of international affairs management? In the past, in the 50s, in the 60s, you had a number of collective security doctrines. Those have now essentially disappeared. NATO exists, but it is more or less a toothless entity. The doctrine of collective security is basically devalued today, as Abba Eban, another great political scientist and diplomat from Israel, put it. Let me come to my third and final point, which is that the diplomatic service, the diplomatic establishment, the foreign ministry is the first line of defense of every country. It is only when diplomacy fails that we turn to outright hard power, including war. Example. In 1999, India and Pakistan had a clash at Kargil when India discovered that during the months of winter, Pakistani troops had moved forward beyond the so-called line of control and had occupied certain areas that were within India's line of control. And India pushed them back. India fought very hard. Our soldiers are extremely brave, and after 3 months, 4 months, they pushed back the Pakistani troops. During that period, two things are observable. First, while both sides used aircraft in support of their ground forces, India did everything it could to make sure that its aircraft did not cross beyond the line of control. That is an exercise of self-restraint. The second point, while the war was continuing, political dialogue, negotiations continued in the background. Major powers played a role discreetly, and in the end, a ceasefire was worked out between the two sides with the help of friendly states. That is how war and diplomacy go hand in hand today. I think I should end at this point, because we can continue talking about security and warfare as an aspect of diplomacy, but I want to end by saying that foreign ministries need resources to be able to conduct their diplomatic activities. In India, for the cost of one single modern aircraft, we can get enough resources to give a vast amount of capabilities to the diplomatic service. And this happens in every country, that there is a kind of struggle between those who favor the defense option and those who favor the foreign ministry. Usually the foreign ministry ends up getting the short end of the stick. That's part of the challenges of managing international affairs. Thank you very much.